Mokyr is a distinguished economist who received the 2025 Nobel Prize.
I certainly think that we don't appreciate enough how rich we really are.
In an interview recorded in Stockholm during the Nobel ceremonies, he reveals details about the lobbying the White House is facing today.
There's a lobby in the White House. There's a man called David Sachs, who is sort of the big advisor to the current administration. I worry about people controlling AI. You see things like the surveillance economy. I think the old notions of capitalism are no longer really holding. There is some kind of, I think, alliance between big tech and big government.
He also discusses why Europe is one of the best places to live.
Does the European Union destroy growth in Europe?
And China's role in the modern world.
They are trying a different model of economic development. I don't think China will fail.
Honor having you here. Once you said that GPT was created not for internet, but for steel. Are we richer than we think?
Are we richer than we think? That's actually a very good question. I certainly think that we don't appreciate enough how rich we really are, and that is because most people don't know how poor we were 150, 200 years ago, and how difficult material life was. People were cold in the winter, they were hot in the summer, they did not know how to deal with insects, they did not know how to deal with allergies or pain. Surgery took place without anesthesia. Our life is so much better in every material dimension that you can think of. We are better fed, we are taller, we are healthier, we live longer, we don't bury our children. I mean, in that regard, we are extremely rich. There has been almost no period in history in which even the richest people, the emperors and the popes and the rich merchants of the past did not live nearly as good a life as the middle class in the West lives today.
You fear climate, debt, demographics, but not AI.
No, I don't fear AI. I think AI is eventually a tool. It is going to be controlled by human. The notion that it somehow will control us has always struck me as science fiction. It is used by people. It concentrates information. It makes information accessible. It can do quick, very complicated calculations. It can see patterns that we cannot find any other way. But the idea that they will somehow control us strikes me as fanciful. The real concern is not AI controlling us. It's the people who control AI controlling us.
How we can control that people?
I don't know. And this is still very much up in the air. There is a strong movement, particularly in the United States, against any kind of regulation of AI. There's a lobby in the White House. There's a man called David Sachs, who is sort of the big advisor to the current administration. And basically the idea is that the federal government will regulate very little and the states will not allow to be regulated at all. And that is a concern. But of course, any new technology...
You mean Stargate project, right?
Yeah, things like that. And so I worry about people controlling AI, particularly, you see things like the surveillance economy in which, the government may know exactly what every citizen is doing 24 hours a day.
Surveillance capitalism.
Well, I don't know if it's capitalism. I think it's in a way different from that. I think the old notions of capitalism that we think of capitalism are no longer really holding. I mean, we're looking at something much different, in which there is some kind of, I think, alliance between, big tech and big government that may decide at some point that they have the capability of exercising control over people.
Should we nationalize big tech company?
I don't think so. I think nationalization has always struck me as a bad idea. I think it is much better to sort of find a balance between government and big tech that's somewhere in the middle. That is to say, it is not completely laissez-faire, so that business can do whatever they want, nor do you want to nationalize it. But what you really would like to have is, agencies that, very much like, say, like the Food and Drug Administration, at least until the way it was until a year ago, that looks at, say, pharmaceutics. It doesn't nationalize it, but it exercises control, and it tries to prevent abuse and disasters, usually with mixed results.
Tulip bubble, South Sea bubble, dot-com bubble. Are we now in an AI bubble? Or, is this time different?
If I knew, I would be extremely rich.
You are a Nobel Prize winner.
Yeah, but that's nothing compared to the kind of money I could make if I knew for certain if AI was a bubble or not. If I knew for certain it was a bubble, I would sell it short. If I knew for sure that it was not going to be bubble, I would buy long. But nobody really knows. And in fact, most bubbles turn out to be bubbles ex post, not ex ante. Even the South Sea bubble, people discovered it was a bubble after the bubble burst. We had the dot-com bubble in 2000. I'm old enough to remember it. And I think that was, and it's sort of interesting because the railroad bubbles and the dot-com bubbles and all these other bubbles didn't actually stop the advance of the technology. I mean, dot-coms continued to evolve after 2000. They were never, it didn't stop the progress, nor was it true, the railroad bubble of 1837 to 1842. It slowed down the development of the railroads. And then in the 1840s, they started building them again. And that's how it went. So I don't think the AI bubble will stop the evolution of AI. But some people will make money and some people will lose money, which as always happens during bubbles. And, that's I think, too bad for the people who lose money, but that's how capitalism works.
What's about China? Your new book says China, I mean mostly clan politics. Your new book says clan politics killed China once. Can China fail for the same reason now?
No, I don't think China will fail. I just came back from there, actually. I was in Beijing a couple of weeks ago. No, I think they are trying a different model of economic development, basically a model that has no commitment to liberal institutions, to democracy, to freedom of speech, things like that. These are all things that I find very unattractive. But the fact that I find them unattractive does not mean that they will not work for them. And they're investing enormous amounts, not just in AI, but in basically every area of science that you can think of. They founded hundreds and hundreds of scientific universities, and a lot of Chinese scientists are actually leaving the US now and going back to China.
But they invented gunpowder, printing, and in the 19th century, they failed.
Yes.
Compass.
Oh, yes, look, and much more. The casting
And
of
much
iron,
more.
umbrellas, you name it.
Yeah, and they failed.
They failed. They failed relative to the West. But if you talk to Chinese historians today, they will strongly deny that they failed. They basically will tell you they got what they wanted. And what they wanted was not progress, but stability. And stability, of course, what they call stability, you will call stagnation. But this is what they wanted. You get the Qing dynasty that comes to power in 1644. They are Manchurians. They're not really Chinese. And they're very insecure. And they want things to stay the way they are. And things stayed the way they are basically until the middle of the 19th century. And then all of a sudden they wake up and they realize the West is knocking on their door.
Does the European Union destroy growth in Europe?
No. No, it's done a miraculous job in growing Europe since the Rome Convention of 1957 by creating a huge amount of intra-European trade between the members, and that's created a lot of the European prosperity. Now, these gains have now basically been exhausted.
So why did growth stop in Europe?
Well, I think the advantages of the gains from trade have been exhausted, and Europe hasn't fully switched to a different modality in which the main driver of growth is technological innovation. And so they have been following the technological innovations made in the United States and to a lesser extent in Asia. And in Europe itself, it's sort of slowed down a little bit, but I think it will either pick up or else they will do what they've been doing basically since 1945, and that is, essentially following the American leadership by adopting not just technological innovation, but also managerial innovation, firm structure, antitrust, and on and on and on. So whether Europe is going to follow the American model or create something of its own is hard to know. But I am a great fan of the European Union. I think it's been a fantastic thing to happen in Europe, simply because you compare it to the hundreds and hundreds of years in which Europeans were not just fighting each other, but they were blocking trade, right? And mercantilism imposed tariffs and all kind of blockades and things like that. And since 1945, Europeans basically learned that they can get rich by trading with each other as freely as possible, and more important, let people move from country to country. So this labor mobility within the EU has been very important. And so now, if they want to keep growing, they will have to adopt a somewhat different model. And I think they're struggling with that. And some areas in Europe will do better than others. But I am not really worried about the economic future of the European Union. I'm much more worried about other things, like demographic balances, immigration, things like that. But Europe is rich, as I said earlier, and their life is good. And 90% of the humanity living outside Europe would like to move to Europe. And they're knocking on the doors, and countries won't let them in, less and less. But life in Europe is as good as any life has been since the beginning of humanity. And that's a great, great achievement.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And we're in a truly special place. The room where, for nearly a century, decisions have been made about who will receive the Nobel Prize in Physics, Chemistry, and Economic Sciences. The Nobel Press Conference has just wrapped up, where the laureates answered questions from the media and journalists. We asked a question as well about Poland's and Europe's place in the world, and about what major tech corporations really are today, and whether they need regulation. We asked because one of the Nobel laureates, Philippe Aghion, is a well-known advocate of the view that today's redistribution of wealth isn't working as it should, largely because of tech monopolies.
So welcome to this press conference at the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. We start the press conference, and who would like to start? Take there.
My question to Professor Joel Mokyr. You spent 50 years of your life exploring how growth started. Why is stopped in Europe, maybe except Poland?
So, what has happened in Europe in the last 15 or 20 years is that growth has slowed down considerably. I think if you measured it correctly and took account of product quality improvements and new products, there probably has still been a fair amount of growth, but certainly not as much as there used to be. And I think there's not a single cause that you can attribute it to. To my way of thinking, what is really hidden and not quite expressed in the national statistics is the fact that Europe is rich. Living standards are good, and people want to have fun in life. And one of the ways you have fun is you have leisure, you work less. If you work less, you produce less, and then economic growth slows down. But if we took account of leisure in a national income account, then actually growth would be considerably better than it really is. You know, when I talk to my European colleagues, the interesting thing is they're either just come back from vacation or they're just about to go to vacation. And I think that sort of symbolizes, I think, one of the things that's happening in Europe. The other factor, of course, is that there's an aging process of the population. The number of people in the working force relative to the people who are retired is going down, and that means participation rates are lower, and that too will affect GDP. But on the whole, you know, my sense is life in Europe today is probably better than almost anywhere else in the world. So have a wonderful time, everybody, and enjoy your riches.
I would complete the answer. I love Joel's answer. I think in Europe we have a big problem too. We had catching up growth between 1945 and the mid-80s. It was very much based on we had to rebuild our capital stock, and we caught up with the technological revolution that took place in the US in the early 20th century. It was very much catching up. But then we exhausted the power of catching up, and we failed to move into frontier innovation fully and to take advantage of the IT revolution first. And why is that? First, we don't have a true single market. In fact, the European market is divided. You have the practice of gold plating. Each country, each member state has its own regulation. So we don't have the rents to innovators are not the same as in the US or China. We have a divided market, okay, for goods and services. So the second reason, we don't have a proper financial ecosystem for frontier innovation. For frontier innovation, you need to encourage risk-taking and venture capital, institutional investors. We don't have enough of that in Europe. Sweden being an exception. You do much better than everybody else in Europe when it comes to institutional investors. And we don't have the equivalent of DARPA, a way to reconcile industrial policy and competition policy. You see, DARPA is a way to say in some sectors you need to make big action like defense, energy, biotech, and it's a pro-competition way to do industrial policy. In the US, they have the Defense Advanced Project Agency or the BARDA, which was the equivalent for vaccines. That's how we are all here. In China also, they have their own ways to reconcile industrial policy and competition policy. We don't have such things in Europe. So those are the dimensions where we need to work. And the whole problem, and on the research, we have the European Research Council. But I have to tell you that some people want to put their hands on it. And we need to perennize and augment the power of ERC. ERC is probably the best news that happened to research-based innovation in Europe. And some people want to, stop or to. There is danger on ERC. We should perennize. We should permanent ERC. We should make it fully independent and increase the scope of the European Research Council. I think that's. I'm sorry to be a bit long for my answer.
Okay.
Professor Mokyr, what's the problem of financing science today?
So I think Philippe is absolutely right about this. What is happening in the US, however, is something quite different, which is I think there is a shift back from government funding to private funding of basic science. And I point to organizations, say, like the Gates Foundation, for instance, which is taking advantage of the emergence of enormous personal fortunes of people like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates and Zuckerberg and so on and so forth. And basically, these people have amassed so much money that they can actually take care of the kind of funding that previously was done by things like the National Science Foundation and the National Institute of Health, which in recent years seems to have been cut back by Congress and by the executive. And in a way, that has profound implications for which direction science is going, but I probably wouldn't venture to say whether this is a positive or a negative development, depending on what these private people want. So I think the Gates Foundation has done incredibly good work on things like tropical diseases, for instance, and other things.